The table. No one wanted a story about two people who thought love was a luxury they couldn't afford until the wrong seat at the wrong wedding changed everything. If you've ever walked into a room full of people who used to know you and felt completely invisible, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because this one doesn't just end in love. It ends in justice. Drop your city in the comments right now and hit that like button so I can see how far this story travels. The invitation had said black tie optional, which Amani Brooks had translated, in the quiet desperation of a Tuesday night budget calculation, into wear the emerald dress you already own and pray nobody looks too closely at the hem. She had re-sewn the hem herself. 3 times. The third time, she'd done it by the dim glow of Nia's nightlight, after her daughter had finally fallen asleep, needle moving through the fabric in careful, deliberate stitches, while the rest of the apartment breathed the particular silence of a home that only has 2 people in it, one of whom is 5 years old and dreams out loud. The dress was beautiful. Amani knew that. She also knew that beauty, in rooms like this one, was only ever the beginning of the conversation. The Ashford Grand Hotel ballroom had been transformed into something that bordered on theatrical. White orchids cascading from the ceiling on near-invisible wire, round tables draped in ivory linen so starched it barely moved, and a lighting scheme that seemed specifically engineered to make wealth look like it had always been effortless. Amani had stood in the entrance for exactly 4 seconds, taking it all in, before someone in a tuxedo appeared at her elbow to guide her to her seat. Table 17. She didn't need to count to know it was in the back. She could feel it, that particular geography of social events, the invisible cartography of belonging, where the people who matter get placed near the front and everyone else gets arranged around the perimeter like decorative furniture. Table 17 was so far from the main event that the string quartet sounded like it was coming from a different building. "Mommy," Nia tugged at her hand as they were guided to their seats. "Are we late?" "No, baby. We're right on time." "Then why is our table in the back?" Amani squeezed her daughter's hand once. "Because we get to see everything from here." Nia considered this with the gravity of someone who was 5 and already extraordinarily good at detecting when adults were managing her feelings. Then she looked out at the dance floor, where the flower girls were beginning to gather near the entrance in their cloud of white tulle, and her entire face transformed. "Can I go?" she breathed. "Go ahead. Stay where I can see you." And then Nia was gone. A streak of copper-brown skin and braided hair and pure, uncomplicated joy. And Amani was alone at table 17 with 2 empty chairs, a centerpiece she couldn't afford, and the full, unobstructed view of everything she wasn't. She knew people at this wedding. That was the particular cruelty of it. Her cousin Danielle, the bride, luminous in custom Vera Wang, currently being rotated through the ballroom like a beautiful planet around which all other planets obediently orbited, had grown up 2 streets away from Imani in Baltimore. They'd shared a bathroom at family reunions. They'd borrowed each other's earrings in high school. And now Danielle had married a man whose family's net worth had approximately the same relationship to Imani's annual salary as the sun had to a birthday candle, and the distance between table 1 and table 17 had become something that couldn't be measured in feet. Imani reached for her water glass and kept her face perfectly still. She'd had years of practice at this, the particular art of looking unbothered in rooms that were trying to bother you. She'd perfected it at Meridian Publishing, where she'd spent 4 years producing some of the company's most commercially successful editorial campaigns, while watching colleagues with half her instincts get promoted over her head. She'd perfected it in the grocery store checkout line, calculating whether she could afford the organic strawberries Nia liked, while the woman behind her sighed loudly and checked her phone. She'd perfected it at school pickups and pediatrician waiting rooms and every other place where being a 28-year-old black single mother without a ring on her finger meant you were perpetually available to receive other people's quiet assessments of your life choices. She had not chosen to be a single mother. She had chosen to keep Nia after Marcus left. Those were different things, and she'd stopped explaining the distinction to people who had already made up their minds. At the center of the dance floor, Nia had found the flower girls and inserted herself into their orbit with the diplomatic ease of someone who had never learned to be self-conscious. She was spinning now, arms out, the skirt of her yellow dress catching the light. One of the other girls laughed and grabbed her hand, and they spun together, and Imani felt the specific, breathtaking pain of watching your child be completely, effortlessly happy in a world that hasn't been entirely kind to either of you. She looked down at her water glass. She did not cry. She was very good at not crying. "Is anyone sitting here?" The voice was low and measured and carried the kind of weight that didn't need volume to make itself felt. Amani looked up. The man standing at the adjacent chair was tall. She registered that first, the way his presence reorganized the available space around him. He was black, perhaps mid-30s, with a lean, composed physicality that suggested he worked hard and slept rarely and had long ago made a separate peace with both. His tuxedo fit the way expensive things fit when they've been made specifically for the body wearing them. His face was, and Imani's brain supplied this word before she could edit it, striking. Strong jaw. Dark eyes that were currently looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. She knew his face. Of course she knew his face. It was on the masthead of the company website, on the annual report that got distributed every January, on the framed photographs in the executive corridor that Imani walked past every morning on her way to a desk that was absolutely, definitively not on the executive corridor. Malcolm Reed, CEO of Meridian Publishing, her boss's boss's boss. A man she had seen in person exactly twice. Once at a company-wide town hall where he'd spoken for 40 minutes about editorial vision and then left immediately, and once in an elevator where they'd ridden 6 floors in complete silence while Imani had mentally rehearsed 3 different ways to introduce herself and used none of them. "No," she said. "No one sitting there." He pulled out the chair and sat down with the ease of someone who had long since stopped requiring permission from rooms. Then he looked out at the ballroom with an expression that was, and this surprised her, not the practiced performance of someone working a social event. It was something quieter, something that looked almost like the same thing she felt when she sat in rooms she hadn't been designed to sit in. "Malcolm Reed," he said without turning to look at her. Then he did look at her. "You work at Meridian." It wasn't a question. Imani felt a small, complicated flash of something. Not quite pleasure, not quite alarm. "Imani Brooks," she said. "Editorial strategy, 4th floor." "I know." He said it simply, like it was information he'd had for a while. "You ran the Hartwell campaign." The Hartwell campaign. 18 months of her life, condensed into a 3-word reference. It had been her idea, her execution, her late nights and early mornings, and 200 emails and 1 screaming argument with a printer vendor at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday. It had won Meridian a regional publishing award. Her manager, Derek Paulson, had accepted the award on behalf of the team. "I contributed to it," she said carefully. Malcolm looked at her for a moment. "Ran it," he said. "I've read the internal ran it," he said. "I've read the internal documentation." Imani didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, which had always been one of her better instincts. A server appeared and offered champagne. Malcolm took a glass and held it without drinking. Imani took a glass because her hands needed something to do. "How do you know Danielle?" she asked. Her husband's family has been a Meridian author family for 2 decades. Richard's grandfather wrote 3 of our best-selling history titles in the 80s. He glanced toward the front of the room, where the wedding party was beginning to assemble for the formal entrance. "How do you know her?" "She's my cousin." He turned back to look at her. "And they put you at table 17. He said it without inflection. No pity, no indignation, just the flat acknowledgement of a fact, which somehow made it worse, and also, strangely, better. "I think there was a seating arrangement situation," Imani said. "There was no seating arrangement situation," Malcolm said. "Someone decided table 17 was where you belonged." He took a sip of his champagne. "They were wrong." The ballroom erupted into applause as the wedding party began its procession, and Imani used the noise to cover whatever was happening on her face, because she wasn't entirely sure she could control it. She watched the procession instead. Danielle appeared on her father's arm, and she was genuinely beautiful, radiant in the way that people are radiant when everything they've worked toward has finally, publicly, arrived. Imani felt genuine happiness for her. She also felt the particular loneliness of someone watching a life they'd once imagined for themselves proceeding without them, on the other side of a very large room. "Is that your daughter?" Malcolm asked quietly, during a lull in the applause. Amani looked toward the dance floor. Nia had migrated to the edge of the flower girl procession and was currently attempting to match their pace and carry an invisible bouquet with tremendous seriousness. Yes, Amani said, and despite everything, the word came out warm. She's got good instincts, Malcolm said. She found the people who were moving and joined them. Amani looked at him. That's a very specific observation. I have a son, he said simply. Older. He would have stood at the edge and watched for an hour before he let himself walk out there. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. He gets that from me. The ceremony began, and they fell into a silence that was, against all reasonable expectation, comfortable. Amani discovered over the course of 45 minutes that Malcolm Reed had apparently decided that Table 17 was precisely where he wanted to be, and that he was not a man who made decisions arbitrarily. He didn't perform. That was the thing she kept noticing. Every other powerful person she'd encountered in professional settings had a version of themselves they deployed in public, a curated presentation of authority and ease. Malcolm sat beside her like someone who had gotten tired of performing long before tonight and had simply stopped. He watched the ceremony with genuine attention. He laughed once, low and brief, when the ring bearer dropped the rings and then looked up at the assembled crowd with an expression of pure philosophical catastrophe. He didn't take out his phone. Nia, during the reception portion, materialized at Amani's elbow like a small, determined satellite returning to orbit. "Mommy?" she announced. "I was in the procession." "I saw you, baby." "Not officially," Nia clarified with great precision. "But practically." She looked at Malcolm with the direct, uninflected assessment that 5-year-olds are capable of when they haven't yet learned that staring is considered rude. "Who are you?" "Malcolm," he said, and turned in his chair to face her fully, which was something adults didn't always do for children, and which Amani noticed immediately. Nia considered this. "Do you work with my mom?" "I do." "Are you her boss?" A beat. Something like that. Nia processed this. "She talks about work sometimes," she said, with the air of someone reporting field research. "She says it's complicated." "Nia," Amani began. "It is complicated," Malcolm said, without missing a beat. "Your mom is very good at her job, and complicated places don't always know what to do with people who are good at things." Nia looked at him for another long moment. "I'm good at spinning," she offered. "I saw. You were the best one out there." Nia smiled. Sudden and total, the way children smile when they've decided someone is acceptable, and then climbed into the empty chair on Amani's other side and began constructing something with the sugar packets from the center of the table. Amani looked at Malcolm. He was already looking at her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" She didn't answer immediately because the honest answer was complicated. "For sitting here. For not making me feel like a charity case. For talking to my daughter like she's a full person, for knowing about the Hartwell campaign, for all of it, somehow, at once. For the observation about spinning," she said instead. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. The dinner service had been going for perhaps 20 minutes when the catastrophe arrived in the form of a passing server, a sudden crowd surge near the head table, and a full glass of red wine. It happened fast. The server turned. Someone bumped his elbow. The glass tipped in a slow, terrible arc, and the deep Merlot, $30 a bottle Merlot, the kind of Merlot that costs more than Imani's grocery budget for the week, came down directly onto the front of Nia's yellow dress. Nia froze. Her small face went utterly still with the specific suspended horror of a child who has not yet decided whether to cry or not, balanced perfectly on the razor edge of that decision. The server was apologizing. Amani was already moving, napkin in hand, doing the mental calculation of what dry cleaning would cost, and whether this dress could even be saved, and whether crying in a ballroom bathroom was an option she was currently permitted, given her company's CEO was sitting 3 feet away. And then Malcolm was on his knees on the ballroom floor beside Nia. Amani stopped. He was already talking, low and easy, the way you talk to a small person who is standing on the edge of a large feeling. "Hey," he said to Nia, "look at me for a second." Nia looked at him. "I'm going to show you something," Malcolm said. He reached into the breast pocket of his tuxedo jacket and produced, with a brief practice gesture, one of the small wrapped dinner mints from the table. He held it up between two fingers. Then he closed his hand around it, blew once, and opened his hand again. The mint had disappeared. Nia's face transformed. The tears evaporated. Her mouth dropped open. "Where did it go?" she demanded. "I have no idea," Malcolm said gravely. He reached toward her ear. She ducked in anticipation, giggling, and produced the mint from behind her opposite shoulder. "There it is. It followed you." Nia grabbed it and laughed, a real laugh, the kind that reset the whole register of the room. The server exhaled. The nearby guests, who had been watching with the frozen attention of people waiting for someone to cry, visibly relaxed. Imani stood with the napkin in her hand and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't even known was tight. Malcolm stood. He was not performing. He didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. He simply stood up, straightened his jacket, and sat back in his chair like a man who had done what needed doing and saw no reason to make an occasion of it. "You have a son," Imani said. 7 years old, he confirmed, named Eli. He picked up his fork. He went through a magic trick phase. I still remember 6 of them. "Where is he tonight?" "With my sister. She watches him when I have these things." He said these things with a mild resignation that was entirely familiar to Imani. The shorthand of parents who have learned to refer to their social obligations as logistical problems. "How long have you been doing it alone?" she asked. The question surprised her even as she asked it. Too direct, too intimate for a conversation that had technically started 40 minutes ago. Malcolm didn't seem to find it intrusive. He considered it the way he seemed to consider most things, with a brief, real attention. 5 years, he said. Eli's mother passed when he was 2, cardiac event. No warning. He said it factually, which she recognized as the voice of someone who has told this story enough times that the telling of it has become separate from the feeling of it. "You?" "His father left when Nia was 8 months old," she said. "Not passed, just left." "That's a different kind of loss," he said. "It is," she agreed. They ate in silence for a moment. Around them, the reception buzzed and glittered. Toasts being made, music beginning to rise, the complicated social machinery of a wedding operating at full capacity. Table 17 remained an island. "Can I ask you something?" Imani said. "Yes." "Why are you sitting here? You're—" She gestured, a small motion that encompassed his general existence as someone with options. "You could be anywhere in this room." Malcolm looked out at the ballroom. At the table near the front where Richard's family was holding court, where several people had glanced over at him throughout the evening, with expressions that suggested they were calculating the value of catching his attention. At the other executives, she could now identify at various tables. 2 of Meridian's senior vice presidents, the head of distribution. "I could," he said. He looked back at her. "This is where I chose to be." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "Because I've spent a significant amount of time in rooms where I was expected to perform my position for an audience, and I find I'm very tired of it." He set down his fork. "And because when I walked in here and saw where they'd put you, I wanted to sit at that table." Imani looked at him. "That sounds like a statement." "It is," he said simply. The string quartet had shifted to something with a waltz tempo. On the dance floor, Danielle and her new husband were circling each other with the particular concentration of people who have taken exactly enough dance lessons to be dangerous. Nia had returned to her new friends among the flower girls, and their small contingent had colonized a corner near the cake table. "I have a question for you," Malcolm said. "Okay." "The Hartwell campaign. The Regional Publishing Award." Imani's jaw tightened briefly before she controlled it. "What about it?" "Paulson accepted the award. His name is on the external documentation. Your name isn't on anything." "That's how it was structured," she said carefully. "That's how he structured it." Malcolm's voice remained even, but there was something beneath it now, a precision that reminded her that this was not actually a social visit. This was a man who ran a company. That wasn't a structural inevitability. "I'm aware of that." "I want you to know that I'm aware of it too," he said, "and that I have been for a while." He looked at her directly. "Some things at Meridian have not been operating the way they should. I'm addressing it." Imani processed this carefully. She had spent 4 years building a very precise internal architecture around her career frustrations, a structure that allowed her to continue showing up and doing excellent work without letting the bitterness of being overlooked consume her. Malcolm's words were, in the very best interpretation, extraordinary validation. They were also potentially the kind of thing that could dismantle 4 years of careful emotional construction in a single conversation. With respect, she said, I've heard versions of that before. Not from you, but from people in rooms like the ones you're normally in. He nodded slowly. That's fair. I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm saying my daughter's school fees are due in February, and I can't afford to believe in things that don't materialize. Something in his expression changed, deepened, maybe. Like she'd said something that landed somewhere real. I understand that, he said. Concretely. Good, she said. They looked at each other for a moment across the impossible strangeness of sitting at table 17 in the back of a ballroom that hadn't expected either of them, and Amani thought, I do not know what is happening right now, but I am not afraid of it, which was, she would later understand, the beginning of something. Chump. Iskem. It was Nia who created the crisis that changed everything. At 8:30 in the evening, Imani's phone buzzed with a message from Keisha, her regular babysitter, who was also her downstairs neighbor and one of her 3 genuinely reliable people in the world. Imani, I'm so sorry. My mom just called. She had a fall. I have to get to Jersey right now. I'm so sorry. I would never. Imani read the message twice. Then she put her phone face down on the table and sat very still for a moment, doing the math. The hotel was 45 minutes from their apartment in a rideshare, or an hour 20 by transit at this hour. Nia had been awake since 6:30 this morning and was currently running on wedding cake and adrenaline, but she would crash within the hour, and when she crashed, she needed to be horizontal, and Imani could not put a sleeping 5-year-old over her shoulder and navigate 45 minutes of late-night transit in an emerald dress with a restitched hem. She could call another rideshare. That was $60 she didn't have until next Thursday. She could ask Danielle for a moment, but Danielle was in the middle of her own wedding reception, and asking your cousin to step away from her wedding because you didn't have babysitter money felt like exactly the kind of thing she'd sworn she would never do. She could leave now before Nia hit the wall and pay for the rideshare and figure out the math next week. What happened? She looked up. Malcolm was watching her face with the focused attention of someone who was very good at reading situations. Babysitter emergency, she said. I need to get Nia home. How far? 45 minutes. An hour with traffic. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I have a suite upstairs, 2 bedrooms. I'm not using one of them. He said it without particular inflection. No performance of generosity, no suggestion that she should feel obligated. Nia can sleep. You don't have to go anywhere. Imani opened her mouth. I know how it sounds, he said before she could speak. I'm not asking you to trust me because I'm your CEO. I'm asking you to consider it because you're a parent who needs a practical solution to a practical problem, and I happen to have one. I know you don't need it, he said. That's not what I said. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them was performing anything. 2 separate bedrooms, she said. Yes, and I can leave whenever I want, obviously. And this has nothing to do with work. He held her gaze. This has nothing to do with work. Nia appeared at Imani's elbow, right on schedule, with the specific gravitational collapse of a small person whose energy had finally reached its limit. Her eyelids were heavy. She was still holding the dinner mint from the magic trick. Mommy, she said, I'm tired. Imani looked at her daughter. She looked at Malcolm. She looked at the ballroom around them. The spinning lights, the music, the 45 minutes and $60 between her and her daughter's bed. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. Malcolm nodded once. No triumph. No performance. He simply stood and moved to help Nia, who reached up and took his hand with the absolute unconscious trust of a child who has already decided that someone is safe. And Imani followed them both toward the elevator and thought, this is either the beginning of something very good or something I will need to protect myself from. She could not yet tell which. She wasn't sure she needed to. The suite was on the 14th floor and had a view of the city that Amani stood in front of for a long time after she'd gotten Nia settled into the second bedroom, tucked into a hotel bed with a blanket pulled up to her chin and the dinner mint placed carefully on the nightstand because she had decided it was her most important possession. Malcolm had ordered room service without asking, tea, which appeared at the door 7 minutes after they arrived, along with a plate of small pastries that he put on the coffee table and did not touch. He had changed out of his jacket. He sat on the couch with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, looking like someone who had been excellent and controlled all evening and had reached the specific hour of night when excellence becomes optional. "How long has she been alone?" he asked. Not about Nia. He'd said she with a weight that meant Imani. "She's not alone. She's got me." "That's not what I meant." Imani sat across from him with her tea and thought about lying, and then thought about the fact that she had spent 4 years being careful in precisely this company's presence and was tired of it. "Since she was 8 months old," she said. "So, 5 years, essentially." He nodded. He didn't say that must be hard or you're so strong or any of the other things people said, which was its own kind of relief. "You?" she asked. 5 years for me, too." He looked out the window. "Eli doesn't remember her, his mother. He asks about her, and I tell him things, and he listens, and then he asks again later, and I tell him the same things. Differently each time, so it's not like a recording, but he doesn't remember." "How do you—" She stopped. "How do I what?" "Hold both things at once, running something as big as Meridian and being present for him." He was quiet for a moment. "Badly, sometimes," he said honestly. "He went through a period last year where he told my sister I was the best bad dad he knew." Imani made a sound that was almost a laugh. "What did you do?" "I took 3 days off work and we went to a cabin in Vermont and made very bad pancakes for 3 straight days." A pause. "He has not repeated the complaint." "That's a good solution," she said. "It was a temporary solution. The real answer is that I'm still learning, and I think—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "I think the honest thing is that I'm not always good at the part that isn't work, that the work is the part I know how to do, and the other part—" He stopped. "The other part is harder," she said. "Yes." Outside, the city moved through its night routines. Imani thought about the fact that she was having this conversation, this particular specific conversation about loneliness and parenting and the particular difficulty of being a person outside of what you're good at, with Malcolm Reed, who was her CEO, whom she had ridden an elevator with in silence, whom she had been frightened of in a professional sense for 4 years. He seemed, she thought, like someone who was also frightened of things, different things she hadn't yet seen. A photographer had caught them at the elevator on the way up. A wedding photographer who had apparently not gotten the organizational communication about who was and wasn't a couple, and who had snapped 3 quick frames as they moved through the lobby with Nia between them, Malcolm's hand at the small of Imani's back, in the unconscious way of someone guiding a child through a crowd. Imani had tensed. The photographer had grinned. "Beautiful family," the photographer had said. Malcolm had paused. He had looked at Imani with something she couldn't entirely decipher, something quick and real and then controlled. And then he'd leaned in slightly, not close enough to be inappropriate, just close enough to be heard, and said quietly into the space near her ear, "Pretend I'm your husband tonight, just for the cameras, so you don't have to explain anything to anyone." And Imani had looked at the photographer, and at the ballroom full of people who had placed her at table 17, and at her sleeping daughter, who was about to be carried to a hotel room that wasn't hers, and she had felt something loosen and something else tighten simultaneously, and she had said, "Okay, just that, just okay." Now, sitting across from him in the 14th floor suite with tea going cold in her hands, and the city spread below them like 1,000 ordinary lives proceeding without drama. She thought about that word. Okay, the way it had come out without the careful architecture of caution she normally built around everything. The way it had felt for exactly 1 second, like something she actually meant. "For what it's worth," Malcolm said, and she realized he was watching her. "I meant what I said earlier, about things at Meridian not operating the way they should." He held her gaze. "I don't make statements I don't intend to follow through on." I know your reputation, she said. Then you know I don't say things for effect. I know, she said quietly. Good. He stood, moved toward the door to his room, stopped. The suit jacket is in the closet if Nia needs a blanket in the night. The thermostat is on the wall. Lock the suite door from the inside. There's a secondary bolt. Imani looked up at him. He was standing in his doorway with his sleeves rolled up and his expression doing something she didn't have a name for yet, something that was careful and honest and tired in the way that people who have been managing large, difficult lives are tired, and that looked from the distance of the 14th floor above a city that didn't care about either of them, surprisingly like the face of someone she recognized. Malcolm, she said. He waited. Thank you. Not for the room. She thought about how to say it. For sitting at table 17. He looked at her for a moment. It's where I wanted to be, he said simply, and went to his room, and Imani sat with her cold tea and the city and the particular terrifying sensation of a door opening that she hadn't even known was closed. She sat there for a while. She didn't move. She was very, very careful with what she let herself think. But she was smiling. Just a little. Just enough. She woke before Nia did. That was unusual. Nia was an early riser by constitution, a child who treated sunrise as a personal invitation. And Imani had spent 5 years calibrating her own sleep to the edges of her daughter's schedule, always the last one down and the first one needed. But the hotel room was darker than their apartment, the curtains heavier, and the mattress was the kind that remembered the shape of your body and held it like a quiet argument against leaving. And so Imani lay still in the gray pre-morning light and listened to the city below and thought about the night before with the particular clarity that comes only at 5:15 in the morning when the defenses haven't fully loaded yet. She thought about table 17, about the way Malcolm had sat down beside her like he'd been headed there all along, about the magic trick and Nia's laugh and the cold tea and the city through the 14th floor window, and the word okay that had come out of her mouth without the usual scaffolding of caution around it. She thought about pretend I'm your husband tonight, and what it had felt like to say okay to that, and what it meant that it had felt for exactly 1 second like something she wasn't pretending at all. She got up before she could finish the thought. Nia was still asleep, one arm flung over the side of the bed, the dinner mint from the magic trick standing guard on the nightstand exactly where she'd placed it. Imani stood in the doorway of her daughter's borrowed room and looked at her for a long moment. The round cheek pressed into the pillow, the braids slightly loosened from a night of restless movement, the small, perfect fact of her, and felt the thing she always felt when she watched Nia sleep, which was an emotion so compound and specific that she had never found a single word for it. Love? Yes. But also something that was almost fear. The particular terror of having something this essential, this irreplaceable, in a world that didn't guarantee anything. She changed quietly, called a car, and had Nia dressed and downstairs with her shoes on and the dinner mint in her pocket before 7:30. She did not knock on Malcolm's door. She told herself it was because it was early, and he had every right to sleep in a hotel room he was paying for. She did not examine this reasoning too carefully. In the elevator, Nia looked up at her and said, "We didn't say goodbye to Malcolm. He was asleep, baby. We should have left a note. We'll see him at work." Nia considered this. He knew a magic trick, she said, as though this were relevant biographical information that needed to be formally entered into the record. Most people don't know magic tricks. I know, Imani said. Does he know other tricks? I don't know. You should ask him, Nia said, with the serene authority of someone who has identified a simple solution to a simple problem. At work. The lobby was quiet at this hour. A few early departures, a single conference attendee moving through with rolling luggage, and the expression of someone already composing their Monday inbox. The morning light through the glass doors was thin and pale and honest, which was the kind of light Imani generally trusted more than the gilded version that had made the ballroom look like a stage set the night before. She stepped outside and breathed in the cold air and told herself she was fine. She was fine. She had a ride coming in 4 minutes and a daughter who was currently trying to make the doorman laugh by showing him the magic mint and a Sunday ahead of her and work on Monday, and a life that was hers and that she'd built herself and that was by any reasonable measure good. She was fine. She was thinking about his voice when he'd said, "It's where I wanted to be." She was very fine. The ride arrived, she got in, she did not look up at the 14th floor. She was almost entirely certain she would have seen nothing anyway. Almost. Monday came with the ordinary brutality of Mondays. The alarm, the negotiations with Nia over breakfast, the school drop-off, the 40-minute commute, the elevator to the 4th floor that was identical to every elevator she'd ridden to the 4th floor for 4 years, except that now she stood in it and thought about a different elevator and a different floor, and a hand at the small of her back and a photographer saying, "Beautiful family." Her desk was where she'd left it. Her inbox was where she'd left it. The large open-plan office of Meridian Publishing's editorial strategy department was exactly as it had been on Friday. The too bright overhead lighting, the standing desk by the window that everyone fought over, and that currently belonged to Devin because he'd claimed it with a houseplant as territorial marker, the particular acoustic landscape of 20 people clicking and typing and occasionally walking to the kitchen for coffee that was never quite good enough. She sat down and opened her email and tried to be normal. She failed somewhat when her phone buzzed at 9:47 with a message from a number she didn't have saved. Nia left the mint on the nightstand. "My housekeeper found it this morning and thought it was a clue to a mystery. I told her it was magic." Imani stared at her screen for a moment. Then she looked around the office with the reflexive paranoia of someone who suspects they are visibly doing something they shouldn't be. Devin was battling his houseplant. Chandra was on a call. Nobody was watching her. She typed back, "She's going to want it returned. She considers it evidence that magic is real." The reply came in under 2 minutes. "I'll send it by courier." "No, I'll keep it. Leverage for the next time she needs a magic trick." Imani put her phone face down on her desk and sat with the thing that was happening in her chest, which was not appropriate for a Monday morning in an open-plan office, and tried to return to her inbox. She did not succeed immediately. The week passed in the ordinary way of weeks at Meridian, which meant it was 40% content and 60% the specific political weather system that existed in any organization large enough to have an executive floor. Imani worked. She did what she always did. Showed up early, stayed sharp, produced work that was precise and creative, and occasionally brilliant in ways that got absorbed into the departmental output without specific attribution. Derek Paulson remained Derek Paulson, which meant he continued to present her ideas in meetings with the confidence of someone who had originated them and occasionally thanked her afterward in a way that was somehow worse than not being thanked at all. She did not see Malcolm. She saw his name on an email that went to the entire company, something about a strategic restructuring and a commitment to evaluating internal talent pipelines, which she read 3 times and then archived, because reading emails from your CEO 3 times was not behavior she intended to normalize. She thought about him at pickup on Wednesday, when Nia asked unprompted if the man from the wedding was going to come to dinner. She thought about him on Thursday evening when she was at the kitchen table with her laptop, reviewing a proposal that had been assigned to her but would certainly be presented by someone else. And the apartment was quiet and Nia was asleep, and the silence had that specific inhabited quality it got sometimes. Not lonely, not exactly, but aware of its own dimensions. She thought about him with the particular discipline of someone who is trying to think about something less than they are actually thinking about it. She did not contact him again. On Friday afternoon, the office's conversational ambient noise shifted slightly in a way that Imani had learned over 4 years to register without appearing to register. A change in the quality of hallway movement. A subtle recalibration of energy near the corridor that led to the glass-walled conference rooms on the east side of the floor. She kept her eyes on her screen. Brooks. She looked up. Victor Hale was standing at the edge of her workspace. Victor was 53, silver-haired, and carried himself with the specific authority of someone who had been at a company long enough that the architecture of the place had come to feel like a personal possession. He was Senior Vice President of Editorial Operations, which meant he was technically 3 levels above her and practically present in her daily life in the way of weather. Constant, influential, and not particularly interested in her preferences. He had the expression he usually had when he came to speak to her specifically, which was the expression of someone delivering reasonable information in a reasonable tone while meaning something else entirely. "I need those Q3 campaign projections by end of day Monday," he said. Imani looked at him. "Those projections were submitted 2 weeks ago. Derek has them." "Derek's on leave. I need them directly from the source." He smiled, briefly and without warmth. "Given that you're the source." She held his gaze. "I'll resend them." Good. He didn't leave immediately, which was the tell. Victor always lingered slightly when he wanted you to feel the weight of his position, a small, practiced assertion of gravity. You were at the Ashford event last Saturday. It wasn't a question. My cousin's wedding, she said carefully. Of course. He glanced around the office with the mild interest of someone noting the furniture. I saw you were seated with Reed. He looked back at her. Small world. He introduced himself, Amani said. Her voice was even. She had a lot of practice at even. Right. Another brief smile. The projections by Monday, Brooks? He walked away. Amani looked at her screen and did not move for a moment, and then did the thing she always did, which was to take the moment apart very quietly in her head, examine each piece, and place it in the appropriate category. Possibly nothing, possibly something, file and monitor. She filed it under possibly something and went back to work. The Saturday after the wedding, she took Nia to the farmer's market 2 blocks from their apartment, which was their standard issue weekend ritual, the one that cost $12 and involved Nia testing every free sample, regardless of whether she liked the product, and Amani buying whatever vegetables were on sale and letting herself exist for 2 hours in the uncomplicated pleasure of a morning that didn't require anything from either of them except presence. They were at the jam vendor when her phone rang. The number wasn't saved. She answered it anyway because she'd been doing that lately. I have a question, Malcolm said, without preamble. Amani held the phone to her ear and watched Nia deliberate seriously between strawberry and fig jam samples. Okay. Do you work Saturday mornings? I'm at a farmer's market with my daughter. That's not what I asked. It's the answer to what you actually meant. She moved down the vendor row, one eye on Nia. I work when I need to work. I don't have the kind of job where Saturday is guaranteed to be mine. You should, he said. Saturdays should be yours. Something in the way he said it, direct and flat and like it was simply a fact of the world he intended to assert, made her stop walking. Is this a work call? She asked. A pause. No. Then why are you calling me? Because I wanted to know if you were working Saturday mornings. Another pause, and something in his voice shifted almost imperceptibly, like a door that had been cracked open a small additional increment. And because Eli asked me this morning if I knew any good magic tricks, and I told him I knew one, and he asked me where I learned it, and I told him I learned it from someone, and he asked who, and I said a friend. Amani stood very still at the farmer's market while Nia decided definitively that she preferred strawberry. A friend, she said. Is that inaccurate? She thought about table 17, about cold tea and the city through 14th floor glass. About it's where I wanted to be, said simply, with no performance around it. No, she said. That's not inaccurate. Good. A brief silence. Eli's been asking about a science museum. I know it's a substantial imposition, but if Nia... She would love a science museum, Amani said. The words came out before the committee could review them. She heard something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Not the voice of a smile exactly, but the space where one would be. Saturday after next, he said. If that works. That works, she said. Okay, he said. And she thought, there it is again. That word, moving back and forth between us like a door that keeps being opened. The Science Museum was Eli's domain in a way that made Amani love him almost immediately. He was 7 and slight and possessed of a focused intensity about things that interested him, that reminded her sharply and with great affection of the particular quality of children who have spent significant time in the company of one thoughtful adult, rather than many distracted ones. He went directly to the space exhibit without hesitation, as though he'd already mapped the building, and stood in front of the scale model of the solar system with an expression of pure, private satisfaction. Nia, who had no existing opinions about space but was excellent at adapting to available enthusiasm, stood beside him and said, Is that Jupiter? Saturn, Eli said. Jupiter's bigger. It's over there. He pointed without breaking his gaze from the model. Saturn has the rings. I know that, Nia said with enormous composure. The rings are made of ice, Eli said, and rock, but mostly ice. Cool, said Nia. Eli looked at her for the first time. "It is cool," he said with absolute seriousness. "That's the correct response." And then he went back to the solar system, and Naya went with him. And Amani stood beside Malcolm and watched their two children examine the scale model of the universe together, and felt something she couldn't name settle somewhere in her chest, like a stone, being placed very carefully in exactly the right spot. "He doesn't warm up fast," Malcolm said quietly, beside her. "To people." "Nia does," Amani said. "She warms up to everyone immediately. I've always been slightly worried she'll warm up to the wrong person." "She didn't with Victor Hale's assistant at the office holiday party last year," Malcolm said. Amani looked at him. "How do you know Nia was at the holiday party?" "You brought her. She was 5 months old. She refused to let Derek's wife hold her and cried every time Hale came near the refreshment table." A pause. "I observed this from a reasonable distance." "You remember a specific baby from 3 years ago?" "I remember specific things," he said simply, "when they matter." She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment, and the particular quality of that silence was the kind that doesn't need to be filled, the kind that has its own content, its own specific weight, that means something without requiring articulation. "She cried every time Hale came near the refreshment table," Amani said slowly. "Every time," he confirmed. "Consistently. 5-month-olds have good instincts." "They do," he said. She filed this. The name, the small pattern, the reference to Hale delivered with that careful, measured, completely neutral tone. In the same folder she'd filed the Friday conversation. The possibly something folder, which was getting heavier. They walked through the museum in the way of two people who are pretending they are simply accompanying children while actually talking to each other with the focused attention of people who have discovered that the other person is worth that attention. They talked about Eli's specific gravity towards science, and away from any subject that required him to guess at a right answer. They talked about Nia's opposite tendency, her comfort with ambiguity, her pleasure in stories that didn't resolve cleanly. They talked, briefly and carefully, about the experience of raising children who were, in specific ways, temperamentally different from yourself, and what it meant to parent someone whose emotional landscape you had to learn rather than recognize. "Do you ever worry?" Amani asked, standing in front of a display on deep ocean ecosystems, while Eli read every placard with the systematic attention of a researcher, that you're not doing it right, not the logistics, the emotional part. "Constantly," Malcolm said, without hesitation. "I grew up in a house where you demonstrated love by providing for people. My father worked 60 hours a week and never missed a bill and almost never asked me what I was feeling." He paused. "I'm trying to do it differently. I don't always know if I'm succeeding." "Eli wanted to know what you felt when his mother died," Amani said carefully. "Did he tell you that?" Malcolm was quiet. "Yes." "What did you say?" "I said I felt like someone had taken a wall out of my house, that everything was still standing, but the wind could get in now." He looked at the deep ocean display without seeing it. "He was 4. I wasn't sure he understood." "But he probably understood more than you think," Amani said. "He drew a picture of a house with a hole in it," Malcolm said. "Taped it to his door. Keeps it there." Amani didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They stayed 3 hours. On the way out, Nia and Eli walked ahead of them in a state of negotiated alliance. Eli was explaining the physics of Saturn's ring formation. Nia was listening with what appeared to be genuine interest, although she was also slowly steering them toward the gift shop with the sublime political skill of a diplomat who has identified a goal and is pursuing it indirectly. "She's maneuvering him," Malcolm observed. "She's always maneuvering someone," Amani said. "She'll be in sales or foreign policy." "He knows," Malcolm said. "He's letting her. He never lets people." Amani looked at him. He was watching the children with the expression she was coming to recognize as his real one, the one that existed in the spaces between the controlled, composed executive face, the one that was tired and careful and genuinely, quietly glad. "Malcolm," she said. He turned. "This was—" She stopped, assembled the right words. "This was a good day." He looked at her for a moment with that expression. "Yes," he said. "It was." They did not touch. They did not need to. They stood in the afternoon light outside the Science Museum while their children argued pleasantly about whether the gift shop sold actual Saturn replicas, and something that had been moving slowly between them since Table 17 moved one increment further and settled. The thing about slowly moving things is that they don't always have the decency to stay slow. 3 weeks later, Malcolm called her on a Tuesday evening at 8 o'clock, which was after Nia's bedtime, and after Amani had finished her own work and was sitting in the kitchen with a glass of water and the specific stillness of a house that has been loud all day and is now quiet. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I want to say it correctly." She set down her glass. "Okay." I looked into the Hartwell campaign documentation, the award submission, the internal performance reviews from the last 4 years. A pause. "There have been 11 opportunities for you to be promoted or significantly acknowledged in the last 4 years. Every one of them was either redirected, blocked, or attributed elsewhere." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's not news to me," she said carefully. "I know, but I want you to know that I know it's not just a pattern. It was deliberate." His voice was even, but there was something beneath it, the particular quality of controlled anger in someone who controls themselves extremely well. "Victor Hale has been managing your career trajectory for 4 years, not managing it forward, managing it in place, keeping you productive and visible enough that the company benefited from your work while ensuring you never accumulated the formal recognition that would have made you," a brief pause, like he was choosing the word, "difficult to manage." Amani said nothing for a long moment. The kitchen was so quiet she could hear the refrigerators hum. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I've suspected for 2 years. I've had documentation for the last 3 weeks. What are you going to do with it?" "What needs to be done," he said. "But I wanted to tell you first, because you have the right to know, and because whatever happens next will affect you, and I won't do anything that affects you without making sure you have the full picture." She held the phone and sat in the kitchen silence, and thought about 4 years of showing up and working harder than the room required and watching things she'd built become things that belonged to other people, and about the specific, grinding exhaustion of doing that long enough that you start to wonder whether the problem is the room or whether the problem might be you. She had never let herself fully believe it was the room, not because she didn't suspect it, but because suspecting it and being unable to prove it was a particular kind of damage, and she'd learned to manage the damage by not looking directly at it. Someone had looked directly at it on her behalf. He had found the documentation. He had called her on a Tuesday night at 8 o'clock to tell her himself before anything else happened, because she had the right to know. "Amani," he said, when she'd been quiet long enough that he apparently needed to know she was still there. "I'm here," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Thank you for telling me." "You don't need to thank me for this." "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." A pause. Then, quieter. "Are you okay?" The question was so simple and so direct and so absent of any performance that she felt it somewhere specific, somewhere she didn't usually let things land so cleanly. "I will be," she said. "I know you will," he said. And the way he said it, not as consolation, not as reassurance, but as a statement of observed fact, like he'd watched her operate long enough to know the quality of what she was made of, landed in exactly the same place. She stayed on the phone with him for another 40 minutes. They talked about other things. They talked about Eli's latest science project and Nia's developing theory that butterflies were the moon's personal messengers. They talked about a book manuscript that had come across Amani's desk that she thought had potential, and Malcolm asked her specific, focused questions about the manuscript that made it clear he was genuinely interested in her editorial judgment rather than performing interest, which was a distinction she was increasingly able to make with precision. It was 10 o'clock when she said she had to get some sleep. "Right," he said. A brief, real pause. "Amani." "Yes." "You should know." He stopped, started again. "The last several weeks have been—" He didn't finish, but she understood what the unfinished sentence was doing. She understood it the way you understand things that are said in the space between words, in the particular careful distance between a CEO and an employee and 2 single parents at a farmer's market, and two people standing outside a science museum watching their kids argue about whether a gift shop sells Saturn replicas. "I know," she said quietly. "Okay," he said. That word again. The door opening. "Good night, Malcolm," she said. "Good night, Imani." She put the phone down on the kitchen table and sat in the quiet for a long time, and then she picked up her water glass and went to stand at her apartment window and looked out at the same city she'd been looking at for 4 years from different windows at different hours of the night, and thought, something is changing. Something that cannot be made to go back to what it was. She was not afraid of it. That, she realized, was the significant thing. For the first time in a very long time, the thing that was moving toward her felt like something she wanted to move toward in return, and that sensation, simple and terrifying and real, was something she hadn't felt since long before Table 17, since long before the emerald dress and the hotel suite and the child who kept a dinner mint on her nightstand like a proof of magic. She held it carefully, the way you hold things that matter, and watched the city move through its ordinary night and let herself feel it without immediately building a wall around it. Just for tonight. She would build the wall tomorrow if she needed to. Tonight, she let it be what it was. Piece by careful pieces in the space piece by careful piece in the space between the thing you're feeling and the thing you're willing to show, and Imani had been building versions of this specific wall for years, which meant she was efficient at it. By the time she arrived at the 4th floor on Wednesday morning, she had made a decision, and the decision was this. Whatever was happening between her and Malcolm Reed was happening in the context of a workplace, and workplaces had consequences, and she had a daughter whose school fees were due in February and a career that had already been shaped by forces outside her control without her knowledge, and she could not afford, in any of the several senses of that word, to let a Tuesday night phone call, and the way he said, okay, reorganize her priorities. She was a professional. He was her CEO. The rest of it, the farmer's market call, the science museum, the 14th floor suite, and the cold tea, and the city laid out below them like a question neither of them had answered yet. That was context, not direction. She told herself this at her desk. She told herself this during the 10 o'clock editorial meeting. She told herself this when Devin asked why she seemed distracted, and she said she was fine and meant it approximately 60% of the way. Then Victor Hale stopped at her desk at 2:15 and said, "I wanted to be the first to congratulate you." And she looked up at him, and the expression on his face was so precisely constructed, warm, avuncular, a senior colleague sharing good news, that it took her a full 3 seconds to identify what was wrong with it. "On what?" she said. "Malcolm's announced a new leadership structure," Victor said. "Editorial strategy is getting a senior directorial position. I understand you're being considered." He said being considered the way you say words when you want the person receiving them to feel the distance between consideration and outcome. She'd heard that register before, in Paulson's voice, in various conference rooms, in the particular administrative language of people who deliver information as a form of control. "I hadn't heard," she said carefully. "Of course you hadn't." He smiled. "These things move quietly." A pause, perfectly timed. "Well-deserved, I'm sure. You've worked very hard." He moved away toward the conference rooms, and she turned back to her screen, and the thing she felt was not gratitude or anticipation. It was the specific alertness of someone who has just detected a pattern and isn't yet sure what shape it's making. The company-wide announcement came at 4 o'clock. It was detailed and formal and signed by Malcolm, and it outlined a new senior directorial structure in editorial strategy, effective in 30 days, with appointments to be confirmed following an internal review. Her name was not in the announcement, but the description of the role, campaign development, strategic oversight, cross-departmental liaison, was a description that fit her portfolio so precisely that it might as well have been drawn around her. Her phone buzzed at 4:47. A text from Malcolm. "You'll receive a formal offer letter tomorrow morning. I wanted you to know tonight." She stared at it. She thought about Victor's face at 2:15, the timing of his visit, the precise construction of being considered, the way he'd made sure to be first. She typed back. "Hale came to my desk before the announcement. He mentioned it. The response came back in 4 minutes. I know. I'll address it. 3 words." She read them, and then read them again, and put her phone in her desk drawer and went back to work. The formal offer letter arrived at 8:17 Thursday morning, delivered to her personal email address rather than her work account, which she recognized as a deliberate choice. It was a directorial appointment with a salary that made her read the number twice and then a third time, not because she doubted the figure, but because she had been calibrated, over 4 years, to expect something less. The title was Senior Director of Editorial Strategy. The reporting structure put her in direct communication with the executive floor. She forwarded it to her personal folder. She did not share it with anyone. She called her mother that evening and told her, and her mother said, "Baby," in the voice she used only when something mattered too much for full sentences, and Amani held the phone to her ear and let herself have the moment, just briefly, before she put it away and started thinking about what it would mean on Monday morning. What it meant on Monday morning was Chandra pulling her aside in the kitchen at 9 o'clock with the expression of someone who has information they feel obligated to report. "People are talking," Chandra said, not unkindly. She was one of Imani's actual work friends. The category was distinct from colleagues and small, and Chandra occupied it because she was honest in a place that rewarded performance. "About you and Reed." Imani poured her coffee. "What are they saying?" "The version that's going around HR is that you met at the Ashford wedding. The version going around the editorial floor is that you've been—" Chandra paused, chose words, "in contact outside of work. And the version going around the conference rooms on the east side is that the directorial promotion is connected to the first two versions." Imani held her mug. Her face was doing the thing it had practiced for years. "And what do you think?" Chandra looked at her. "I think you've been doing work worth twice your title for 4 years. And I think the promotion is accurate, and I think the timing is bad." She paused. "I also think Victor Hale had lunch with 3 SVPs last Friday, and the conversation lasted 90 minutes. Imani filed this. "Thank you," she said. "I'm just reporting the weather," Chandra said. "You decide what to wear." She decided to wear the same thing she always wore, which was competence. She accepted the directorial role formally on Tuesday. She showed up to her first senior strategy meeting in one of the glass-walled conference rooms on the east side, the room she'd been walking past for 4 years on her way to the 4th floor, and sat at the table and contributed exactly what she would have contributed anywhere, which was precise and considered and grounded in the kind of long-term editorial vision that takes years of actual work to develop. She was excellent in that room. She knew she was excellent, and she also knew, with the clarity of someone who has been watching institutional dynamics for 4 years, that being excellent was no longer sufficient protection against what was building. She saw Malcolm twice in the following week. Once in the elevator, a different elevator from their first shared ride, a different floor, where they were briefly alone for 4 floors, and he looked at her and said quietly, "How are you holding up?" And she said, "I'm fine." And he looked at her with the expression that had learned to see past "I'm fine" and said, "I know. I'm asking how you actually are." And she said, "Ask me in 30 days when I've proven it." And he said, "You've already proven it. The 30 days are for everyone else." And then the doors opened and they separated and she walked to her new office. She had an office now, an actual door that closed, and sat in it for a moment with her hands flat on the new desk and breathed. The second time was in the lobby, a Friday evening, where he was leaving at the same time she was, which neither of them had arranged, and both of them acknowledged with the brief, calibrated awareness of people who have become increasingly conscious of being observed. They walked to the door together, which was a walk of perhaps 60 feet. And in that 60 feet, he said, "Eli built a model of Saturn. He's been talking about Nia's butterfly theory. He wants to write her a letter explaining why she's wrong about the mechanics, but acknowledging the poetry." Imani almost smiled. She will absolutely not be open to the mechanics. He knows. He's planning to concede the poetry up front as a negotiating position. "He's 7, she said. "He's been watching me negotiate contracts," Malcolm said, and that time she did smile, briefly and helplessly, and then they were at the door and the lobby was busy, and she got into a cab and he went the other direction, and she rode home thinking about Eli writing Nia a formal letter about butterfly mechanics as a strategic document, and about the way Malcolm had said he's been watching me, and about how the simplest things were somehow the ones that got through her walls the most cleanly. She was still thinking about it when the company announced the author retreat. The Ridgeline Retreat was an annual event, 3 days at a mountain lodge in the Catskills. Meridian's top-tier authors and its senior editorial staff together in the organized intimacy of shared meals and working sessions and evening conversations that were supposed to be social but were always also professional. Imani had attended twice before as support staff, managing logistics, running background coordination for the sessions she wasn't officially part of. This year she was attending as Senior Director of Editorial Strategy, with her own sessions to run and her own authors to host. She had arranged Nia's care 2 weeks in advance, confirmed her reservation at the lodge, packed with the efficient precision of someone who does not have the luxury of forgetting things, and driven to the shuttle departure point on a Thursday morning in October, when the light was the specific gold of early autumn in the northeast, and the air had that first real edge of cold. The shuttle was already half full. She found a seat, nodded to 2 colleagues she recognized, and opened her laptop. Victor Hale was not on the shuttle. She registered his absence the way she registered small weather events. Noted, filed, not immediately explicable. The lodge was a 4-hour drive and an hour of mountain road. By the time they arrived, the light had shifted to the late afternoon copper that made the tree line look like it had been set on fire from the inside. The other guests were already gathering in the lodge's main hall, authors, agents, editors, and the warm, specific atmosphere of a retreat was assembling itself. That atmosphere of people who are professionally connected and briefly pretending to be just people. Imani went to the reception desk. The woman behind the desk was apologetic with the practiced efficiency of someone who had delivered this particular news before. "I'm sorry, Ms. Brooks. I'm not seeing a reservation under your name." Imani stood very still. "I confirmed the reservation 2 weeks ago. I have the confirmation email here." She looked at her screen. "But the room was released from the system yesterday afternoon. I don't have any record of why." She looked genuinely troubled. "We're fully booked. I don't have anything available." Imani looked at the woman. She looked at her confirmation email, which was still on her phone, time-stamped 2 weeks ago and never canceled. She looked at the lobby full of her colleagues. She did the math very quietly in her head, 4 hours from the city. Her childcare was arranged for 3 days. Her sessions started tomorrow morning. She could not simply leave. She was still doing this math when Malcolm appeared at her elbow. She had not seen him arrive. She looked at him and understood immediately, from his expression, that he'd been watching the situation from across the lobby and had already, in the way he did things, assessed it. "What happened?" he said, low and even. "My reservation was released yesterday afternoon," she said. Her voice was steady. "They don't have a room." He looked at the reception desk and then at the lobby with an expression that was absolutely controlled, and that she was close enough to now to know contained something that was not controlled at all, a particular compressed anger in the quality of his stillness. "I have a 2-bedroom suite," he said. "The second room is a full guest room. Separate entrance from the common area." He met her eyes. "I know how this looks." "I know you do," she said. "I'm not asking you to be comfortable with it. I'm telling you it's the only available solution to a problem that shouldn't exist." Around them, the lodge lobby was busy, and she was aware, with the specific practiced awareness of someone who has been watched in professional spaces for years, of the proximity of colleagues. She was aware of the calculation she would be making by saying yes. She was also aware that her reservation had been canceled yesterday afternoon, which was after Victor Hale had had a 90-minute lunch with 3 SVPs, which was after the directorial announcement, which was after the Ashford wedding and the photographer and the 14th floor suite and the pattern that was no longer merely something to file and monitor. "Separate entrance," she said. "Yes. I'll need a key that only opens the guest room side. I'll arrange it at the desk." She looked at him for a moment longer, at this man who had sat at table 17 and known about the Hartwell campaign and knelt on a ballroom floor to do a magic trick and called her on a Tuesday night to tell her the truth before anything else happened. She looked at him and thought about walls and what they were for and what they cost. "Okay," she said. He arranged the key. He carried nothing of hers. They walked to the elevator separately and arrived at the suite by different routes, which was a small, deliberate choreography that she appreciated without remarking on. The suite was generous, a central living area, 2 full bedrooms with a shared vestibule, the promised second entrance from the hall. She put her bag in her room and closed the door between the spaces and stood at the window looking out at the mountain tree line going dark in the early evening and thought, someone canceled this reservation deliberately. Someone wanted this exact outcome, wanted me without a room, cornered, visible, available to be narrativized. She thought about Victor Hale's face at 2:15 on that Wednesday afternoon. I wanted to be the first to congratulate you. The first, before the announcement, before anyone else could frame the story neutrally. She opened her laptop and worked until dinner. The evening session was a group dinner, long tables, good wine, the specific combination of professional and social that Retreats engineered. She sat with two of her authors and talked about their next projects with the genuine focus that had always been her best professional quality, and she was good. She was very good. And she felt the room in the way she'd learned to feel rooms, the specific frequencies of attention and assessment, and she knew she was being watched, and she did not let it touch her performance. Malcolm sat at the far end of the table. He was doing what he always did in group settings, which was be present without dominating, asking good questions, listening with actual attention, treating every person at the table like they were worth being in conversation with. She watched him from the distance of the long table and thought, he is the same in every room. He doesn't scale his version of himself to the audience. After dinner, she went up first. She was at her laptop in the guest room by 9:30, finishing prep for tomorrow's sessions. The common area of the suite was quiet. She could hear nothing from Malcolm's side, which was the thing she'd needed to verify. At 11:15, the notification came through the lodge's security system, an automated alert to suite guests about an incident report. She read it once, and then again, and felt the floor shift underneath everything. Confidential contract documents, pre-publication agreements for 3 of Meridian's highest-profile upcoming releases, had been photographed and removed from the business center on the lodge's second floor. The documents had been accessed using a keycard registered to a member of the retreat party. Security was reviewing footage. All suite guests had been notified as a precaution. She was still reading when her phone buzzed. Malcolm, I saw the alert, she said, picking up before the second buzz. It's being handled, he said. His voice was the specific even of someone who has moved past the feeling into the management of the situation. My security team is with lodge management right now. Whose keycard? A beat of silence that told her something. Mine, he said, which means someone accessed my keycard information. She thought about the reservation deletion, about the timing, about the suite arrangement that was now documented in the lodge's records, about the sequence of events beginning with the directorial announcement and moving through a 90-minute lunch and a canceled reservation to a stolen keycard in a business center and a security alert sent to both their suites. This is a construction, she said flatly. Yes, he said. I think so too. Victor. The evidence points in a direction, he said carefully. I'm not naming it before the security footage confirms it. She sat on the edge of the guest room bed. The window showed the mountain dark and the tree line invisible against the night sky. The lodge was quiet below. Malcolm, she said, this retreat was the wrong place for me to be. The reservation deletion, the suite arrangement, whoever is building this story wanted me here, in this specific situation, in this specific room. I know. Which means tomorrow morning the story exists. Whether or not anything happened tonight, the story exists. I know, he said again, and his voice had something in it now. Not the executive control, but something beneath it. The same thing she'd heard on the Tuesday phone call when he'd asked if she was okay and meant it differently than anyone had meant it in a while. I need to think, she said. Take the time you need. Good night, Malcolm. Good night, he said. A pause. Imani, nothing about tonight was designed by me. I need you to know that. I do know that, she said quietly. She put the phone down. She sat for a long time in the dark mountain quiet of the guest room, and then she went to her laptop and opened a blank document and began, with the systematic precision of someone who has been documenting inequities for years, to write down every date, every event, every exchange she could remember, in chronological order, beginning with Victor Hale at her desk at 2:15 on the Wednesday after the Ashford wedding, and ending with a security alert at 11:15 on a Thursday night in October. She wrote for an hour. When she was done, she had 4 pages. She saved it, encrypted it, sent it to her personal email, and put her laptop away. She was very good at documentation. She had learned to be. The morning sessions went well. She ran hers with the focused, authoritative precision of someone who has been doing this work long enough that competence is no longer effortful. It was simply what she was. The authors in her sessions responded to her the way good authors respond to a good editor, which was with the relief of someone who has been understood rather than merely accommodated. She had 2 separate authors request her specifically for their next projects, which she noted because in this particular climate, every data point of evidence mattered. In the afternoon break, she checked her phone and found a message from an unknown number. It was not a text. It was a file, a compressed image file that opened into 3 photographs. Long lens photographs, taken from a distance that suggested they'd been taken from outside the lodge or from a significant remove across its grounds. The first showed her and Malcolm in the lobby at the reception desk, standing close. The second showed them at the dinner table, not close, not touching, not doing anything except existing in the same room, but framed and cropped in a way that made the distance between them seem intimate. The third was the worst. It showed the exterior of the lodge's upper floor, 2 lit windows of the same suite, taken from the tree line, timed at 11:43 p.m. after she'd spoken to Malcolm on the phone. And beneath the photos, 1 line of text from the unknown number. Ask him about the Whitmore bet. Ask him what he gets if he wins. Ask him how long it's been going on. She read it 3 times. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went back to the afternoon session and sat in it for 90 minutes while the words reorganized themselves in the back of her mind with a slow, terrible precision. The Whitmore bet. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know if it was real. She knew only that the message had been designed specifically to reach her in a specific way, designed by someone who understood what her weak points were, where her walls had been built, and exactly how to find the seam between the trust she'd been carefully, slowly building, and the fear she'd been carefully, slowly setting down. After the session, she went to her room and sat on the bed and thought. She thought about what she actually knew, that Malcolm had sat beside her at table 17, that he had been consistent, that he had called on a Tuesday night to tell her about Victor before anything happened, that he had been, in every interaction over 4 months, someone whose version of himself didn't change based on who was watching. That Eli had written Nia a letter about butterfly mechanics as a negotiating strategy, and that was not the behavior of a man who was performing a character for an audience. She thought about what she didn't know, what the Whitmore bet was, and whether it was real, and whether 4 months of consistent, specific, careful behavior could be the architecture of a long con, or whether that was the fear talking. The fear that had learned to dress itself up as wisdom, the fear that said you can't afford to be wrong about this in the voice of protection and meant something closer to paralysis. She thought about Nia keeping a dinner mint on her nightstand as proof that magic was real. She thought about a house with a hole in it, drawn by a 4-year-old and taped to a door and kept there. She thought about 2 people at table 17 who both knew what it meant to sit in rooms that hadn't been designed for them. She thought about all of this for 40 minutes, and then something shifted. Not dramatically, not with the clean resolution of a decision made, but in the way of someone who has been standing very still under something heavy for a long time and feels suddenly the specific and necessary fear of what it will mean to keep standing there. She went to find Malcolm. He was in the business center, which had been cleared and locked since the previous night, but which he apparently had access to. She could see him through the glass panel in the door, standing at the far end with 2 members of the security team and a person she didn't recognize in a dark jacket who might have been from an outside firm. His back was to her. She watched him for a moment, the set of his shoulders, the contained, focused manner of someone managing a crisis, with the same quiet authority he brought to everything, and she thought, this is the person who showed up at my table. This is the person who has been consistent. She knocked on the glass. He turned. She held up her phone so he could see the screen, the message, the photographs. His face did not change in the way of someone caught. It changed in the way of someone who has just understood the scope of what they're dealing with. A widening of the eyes, briefly, and then the compression back into control, but a different kind of control, the kind that has something personal underneath it. He said something to the security team. He came to the door and opened it. "When did you get this?" he said low. "During the afternoon session." He took the phone from her hand carefully, like it was evidence, which it was. He read the message. He looked at the photographs. His jaw tightened slightly, which was the most she'd seen his face do in 4 months. "The Whitmore bet," she said. Her voice was steady. She had made it steady on the walk here. "Tell me what it is." He handed her phone back. He looked at her with an expression that was stripped of every social layer, so no executive composure, no careful management. Just a man looking at a woman he had been honest with and needed to be honest with again. "It was a college dare," he said. "Sophomore year. A group of us, 5 guys in a business program, made a stupid bet about dating. Someone in our group claimed he could get any woman in the program to agree to a first date within 30 days by being completely authentic rather than strategic." He said the word authentic with a flatness that conveyed exactly how 20-year-olds understand authenticity. The group called it the Whitmore bet after the professor who'd assigned the reading that started the argument. It lasted 4 weeks. It was over before junior year. I have not thought about it in 15 years. She held his gaze. "Victor knows about it." "Victor was in our business program," he said. "We were not friends, but we were in the same cohort." He exhaled briefly. He's taken something that is 15 years dead and given it a present tense context. "Made it look like you've been running a play on me," she said, "that the farmer's market and the science museum and the calls and the directorial promotion are all moves." "Yes." He said the word like it cost him something. "I know how it sounds. I know that I cannot tell you to believe me and expect that to be sufficient. I know that the photographs and the timing are designed to make everything that's actually happened look like evidence of something it isn't." He stopped. "What I can tell you is that I sat at table 17 because I wanted to be where you were. I can tell you that the promotion existed in the documentation 3 months before the Ashford wedding. I can tell you that everything I've said to you, I've meant." She looked at him for a long, careful moment. She thought about walls, about what they cost and what they protected, and the difference between wisdom and fear. She looked at his face, stripped, honest, waiting, and then the fear won. Not loudly, not dramatically, not with shouting or accusations or any of the theatrical register that such moments are supposed to have. Just quietly, the way fear wins when it's been built into the architecture for long enough. She thought about Nia and the school fees and 4 years of being managed in place and what it would cost her if she was wrong, and the photographs framed and cropped to tell a story that wasn't true but that she couldn't disprove. And she said quietly, "I need some time." He nodded. He did not argue. He did not reach for her, or perform hurt, or try to manage her response. He simply looked at her and nodded and said, "Okay." And she thought, that word again, and this time it's closing something instead of opening it, and she turned and walked back to her room. She packed her bag that night. She arranged an early car for the morning. She told the lodge desk she had a family situation, which was not entirely untrue. Nia was always the family situation, the first reason and the last one, the thing she came back to when everything else was uncertain. She left before 6. The mountain road was dark, and the fall trees were only shadows against a lighter, dark sky. And she rode the 4 hours back to the city in the specific, suspended state of someone who has made a decision they're not sure is the right one and is not yet ready to find out. She looked out the window the entire way. She did not sleep. She did not look at her phone. She thought about a house with a hole in it and the wind getting in, and whether the wall she'd just built was the kind that kept the wind out, or the kind that just stood between herself and the place where the light came from. She didn't know yet. She sat in the back of the car and watched the city come toward her out of the dark, and she didn't know. The city received her the way cities receive people who come back from somewhere difficult, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, with the pure and different continuity of a place that has been moving the whole time you were gone. She got home at 10:40 in the morning. Nia was at school. The apartment was the specific quiet of a space that belongs to 2 people when only one of them is present. The particular hollow of it, the half-inhabited feeling of rooms that are waiting. Imani put her bag down in the entryway and stood in it for a moment and let the quiet land on her without trying to manage it. Then she made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and opened the 4-page document she'd written in the mountain lodge and read it from the beginning. She read it twice. She was good at reading documents she'd written herself, good at separating the emotional temperature from the factual content, at identifying what was evidence and what was interpretation. It was an editorial skill that had taken years to develop, and that she now applied to the circumstances of her own life with the same precision she applied it to manuscripts. What the document contained, stripped of everything that wasn't verifiable. Victor Hale had been at Meridian longer than Malcolm. Victor had been in Malcolm's college cohort. Victor had been managing her career trajectory for 4 years in a way that kept her productive without advancing her. Victor had visited her desk at 2:15 on the day of the directorial announcement. Victor had had a 90-minute lunch with 3 SVPs after the announcement. Her retreat reservation had been deleted the day after that lunch. Confidential documents had been stolen using Malcolm's keycard information. Photographs of her and Malcolm had been taken by someone positioned outside the lodge with a long-lens camera. An anonymous message referencing a 15-year-old college bet had been sent to her during the retreat's afternoon session. This was the document's content. The document's content was a pattern, and the pattern had a direction, and the direction was not ambiguous. She sat with this for a long time. She thought about the fear that had won in the business center doorway, the quiet architectural fear that had said you cannot afford to be wrong and dressed it up as wisdom. She thought about Malcolm's face when she'd shown him the message. Not caught, not managing, not performing, just a man who understood the scope of what was happening and was waiting for her to decide what to do with it. She thought about what she'd done instead, which was leave. Before confronting, before asking the questions she had the right to ask, before sitting with the discomfort of not knowing and choosing to stay anyway. She had built a wall and called it protection. She was still sitting with this when her phone rang at 2 p.m. The number was the lodge's main line. She picked up. "Ms. Brooks?" A woman's voice is efficient, careful. "This is the front desk at Ridgeline Lodge. I'm calling to follow up on your departure this morning. We've completed an internal review of the reservation deletion, and we wanted you to know that the access was traced to a specific administrative login that has since been suspended pending investigation. I've been asked to convey that the lodge takes full responsibility and that your accommodations for the duration of the retreat have been fully refunded." Amani held the phone. "Who requested the review?" A brief pause. "The request came from Meridian Publishing's corporate office. I believe from Mr. Reed's assistant." She thanked the woman and ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the document on her screen and thought about a man who was dealing with stolen confidential contracts, a fabricated narrative, and a woman who had left without saying goodbye, and who had still, from the middle of all of that, arranged for the investigation of her reservation deletion and the refund of her accommodations. She thought about what that meant. Not what it could mean or what it might mean if she chose to interpret it generously. What it actually, factually, demonstrably meant. That in the context of everything happening to him professionally, Malcolm Reed had thought about what she was owed and made sure she received it. She closed the laptop. She picked up Nia at 3:15 and said very little on the walk home, which Nia accepted with the particular sensitivity she had always shown to her mother's interior weather, climbing onto the couch when they got home and pressing herself against Amani's side and asking nothing, which was its own kind of understanding. "Mommy," Nia said after a while. Is everything okay?" Amani put her arm around her daughter. "It will be." "Is it Malcolm?" Nia asked, with the directness of someone who has not yet learned that this kind of directness is considered intrusive. Amani looked down at her. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you look the same as you look when you read something sad," Nia said, with perfect accuracy. "And the last time you looked like that was when we watched that movie where the dog—" "Yes," Amani said. "Okay, something happened. Is he okay?" She didn't know how to answer that because she didn't actually know the answer. "I think so," she said. "You should call him," Nia said. She said it with the certainty of a 5-year-old who has not yet built any of the walls that complicate communication between adults. "When something is sad, you call." Amani held her daughter for a moment. "When did you get so smart?" "I was always smart," Nia said, serene and factual. "You just didn't ask me until now." She didn't call. That night, she drafted the call 3 times in her head, each version getting as far as the point where she'd have to say, "I left because I was afraid," and stopping there, because the saying of it was the part she wasn't ready for. She went to bed at 11. She woke at 2:17, which was not her habit, and lay in the dark and thought about a house with a hole in it and the wind getting in, and whether some holes were designed to let light through rather than cold. The board meeting notification arrived at 7:43 the following Monday morning. It was not a routine notification. It came from Meridian's chief legal officer, a woman named Patricia Gaines, who Amani had encountered twice and who communicated with the economy of someone who had learned that words had weight and used them accordingly. The message said that an emergency board session had been convened and that the senior director of editorial strategy was required to attend a pre-session briefing at 9 a.m. in the 32nd floor conference room. The 32nd floor was the board floor. She had never been there. She dropped Nia at school at 7:55, changed in the car. She kept a blazer in the back seat for exactly this category of professional emergency and arrived at the 32nd floor at 8:53. Patricia Gaines was waiting for her in the corridor outside the conference room. She was 60, with the posture of someone who had spent a career in rooms that required it, and she looked at Amani with an expression that was not warm, but was also not hostile. It was the expression of a person preparing to deliver difficult information accurately. "Sit down, please," she said when they were inside. Amani sat. "There was an accident Friday evening," Patricia said. "Malcolm Reed was involved in a serious car accident on the mountain road coming down from the Ridgeline retreat. His car went off the road at approximately 6:15 p.m. He was airlifted to Westfield Medical Center. He's been in the ICU since Friday night." The room was very quiet. "He's alive," Patricia said, watching Amani's face. "He has a broken collarbone, 3 fractured ribs, and a significant head injury. He's been unconscious since the accident, but the medical team is cautiously optimistic about his prognosis." Amani's hands were flat on the table. She was not aware of having placed them there. "Friday evening," she said. Her voice was someone else's. "Yes. He left the retreat early. The security team says he departed approximately 40 minutes after." Patricia paused, chose words with the precision of someone who has read a report, "after a reported incident in the business center corridor." 40 minutes. He had left 40 minutes after she walked away from him in the business center doorway. She had been in a car on the mountain road going down while he was getting into a car on the mountain road going up. They had been on the same road, traveling in opposite directions, and she hadn't known. She had been sitting in the back of a car looking out the window at fall trees and thinking about walls, and he had been... "Ms. Brooks," Patricia's voice was careful. "Are you all right?" No, she was not. She was somewhere very far from all right, in the specific geography of a person who has made a decision and learned its consequences before they were ready to. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Her voice came out steady, which was not how it felt. "The board needs assurance that the senior director of editorial strategy can maintain operational continuity in Mr. Reed's absence. That is primarily what this morning's meeting addresses." Patricia held her gaze. "I also need you to know that the security investigation from the retreat has produced significant findings. The documents will be presented to the board this morning. Victor Hale has been placed on administrative leave pending a full review." Something landed in Amani's chest at that. Not satisfaction, not relief, just the dull recognition of a pattern completing itself in the worst possible timing. "When did that happen?" she asked. "Saturday morning. The security footage confirmed his presence in the business center at the relevant time. The keycard information was accessed through a secondary administrative account that had been dormant but that traces to an account created under his login credentials in 2019. Patricia's tone remained even. "There is also the matter of your reservation deletion, the anonymous photographs, and the message you received during the afternoon session, which we've been made aware of." Amani looked at her. "How were you made aware of it?" "Mr. Reed filed a full security report before he left the retreat Friday evening," Patricia said. "He documented everything, including the content of the anonymous message you received. He gave a complete account to the security team and to legal counsel before he drove down that mountain." She sat with that. She held it. Malcolm, 40 minutes after she'd walked away from him, had sat down and documented every single piece of what had been built against both of them, including the message that had been designed to make her doubt him, and had made sure it was on the formal record before he left. He had protected her professional standing even when she'd been the one to leave. She felt something crack, somewhere deep and structural, in the wall she'd built. "I'd like to go to the hospital," she said. Patricia's expression shifted slightly. He's in the ICU. Only family is... I know, Imani said. I'd like to go anyway. Patricia looked at her for a moment. The board meeting is at 9. I'll be in the board meeting at 9, Imani said. I'll go to the hospital after. She was in the board meeting at 9. She was composed and specific and technically complete, and she walked the board through the operational continuity plan with the authority of someone who had been building toward this competence for 4 years and needed nothing from anyone in that room except their attention, which she received. Patricia Gaines, seated to her left, said nothing but gave her one brief, direct nod at the end of the presentation, which Imani interpreted correctly as the highest available denomination of acknowledgement from that particular source. She left at 11:15 and went to Westfield Medical Center. The ICU's family waiting area was on the 6th floor and smelled like all hospital waiting areas. That specific institutional compound of recycled air and effort, and the particular cleanliness of places that are trying to neutralize the fact of what they contain. A nurse at the desk told her, with practiced gentleness, that the patient's family had designated visitor access and that she was not on the list. I know, Imani said. I understand. I'm not asking you to break any rules. She stopped. She thought about what to say, and what came out was the simple truth. I need him to know I came. The nurse looked at her for a moment. I can let his family know someone is here, she said. That's all I can do. That's enough, Imani said. Thank you. She sat in the waiting area. There were 3 other people there, an older couple and a young woman who appeared to be asleep in her chair. Imani sat with her coat in her lap, and her hands folded and thought about the mountain road and the specific irreversible quality of time and what you did and didn't do in it. She sat there for 40 minutes before a woman came through the door. She was perhaps 40, tall and slim and dark-skinned with Malcolm's jaw and Malcolm's eyes in a warmer register, wearing the compressed expression of someone who has been at a bedside for 3 days and is operating on the specific fuel of love and necessity. She looked at Imani with an assessment that was quick and complete and unsentimental. You're Imani, Mama, she said. It was not a question. Yes, Imani said and stood. I'm Diane, Malcolm's sister. She looked at Imani with the focused, unperformative directness of someone who has decided to skip the portion of the interaction that wastes time. He talked about you. Imani held very still. He did? Not the way most people talk about people, Diane said. Not like he was performing a story, like he was figuring something out. She tilted her head slightly. He talked about a wedding, a table in the back, a little girl who knew a magic trick had found her. Imani felt something move in her chest that she couldn't hold away anymore. He also talked about you leaving, Diane said, plainly. Not cruelly, plainly, the way someone speaks who has decided that the other person can handle the truth. He wasn't angry. He understood why. But he left that mountain worried about you and drove that road thinking about something he'd said wrong or hadn't said right. And I want you to know that because I think you need to. Imani looked at her. Is he going to be okay? The doctors think so, Diane said. He has a hard head. He's always had a hard head. A brief, complicated flicker crossed her face. Grief and love and the specific dark humor of someone who has been scared and is now managing the being scared. He was conscious for about 40 minutes yesterday afternoon. He asked about Eli first. He asked about you second. The thing in Imani's chest was doing something she could not continue to manage from a distance. Can I see him? She asked. Diane looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that is actually a decision being made. Then she said, Come with me, Tartan. The ICU room was small and lit with the particular quality of light that exists only in medical spaces, functional and unsparing and indifferent to what the people inside it are feeling. Malcolm was in the bed by the window. He was not the way she'd feared he'd be. Not unrecognizable, not absent. He was still, that was the word for it, the thing that was different. Malcolm, in every version she'd known him, had a quality of contained, directed energy, even in stillness. The man in the bed was simply still. His collarbone was in a brace. There were monitors, a line in his arm, the ordinary paraphernalia of a body being helped to repair itself. His face had the same strong lines she knew, but with a bruising along his jaw and temple that she looked at and felt somewhere physical. Diane stayed near the door. Imani sat in the chair beside the bed. She put her coat over her knees and her hands in her lap and looked at him. "I came," she said quietly. "I know you probably can't hear me, but I came." She paused. "I left the mountain because I was afraid. Not of you. I need you to know that. Not of you. Of being wrong. Of having believed in something and being wrong about it. And of what that would mean for Naya and for the work and for—" She stopped. "I have 4 pages of documentation that tell a very clear story about Victor Hale, and none of it has anything to do with you except that you're the person he was trying to use to damage me with, which he couldn't do if I didn't—" She stopped again. "I trust you," she said. The words came out differently than she'd expected. Not with the weight of a declaration, but with the quieter weight of a fact that had been true for longer than she'd acknowledged. "I built a wall because I trust you, and I didn't know how to hold that safely. I didn't know how to be someone who trusted a person this much without that being a risk I couldn't manage." She looked at his face. "That's not a good reason to leave. I know that." The monitors were steady. Outside the room's small window, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, Eli was with Malcolm's sister's family, doing science homework or building Saturn models or being 7, in a world where his father was in a hospital bed and the things adults did to each other were still mostly outside his comprehension. "Nia told me to call you," Imani said. "She said, when something is sad, you call." A pause. "She's 5. She's already better at this than I am." She sat for another few minutes. Then she stood and put her coat on and looked at him one more time, at the still face and the steady monitors and the city beyond the glass, and said, "Get better. I have things to say to you when you can hear them." Diane was waiting in the corridor. "Thank you," Imani said. "He'll want to know you were here when he wakes up," Diane said. "I'll tell him." She paused. "You should know something else, about the bet." Imani waited. "I was there," Diane said. "Sophomore year. I was at the same school. Different program, 1 year ahead. I was there when that stupid dare happened, and I was there when it was over." Her voice was matter-of-fact and clear. "Malcolm didn't participate. He thought it was, his exact word was juvenile. He said that to the group in front of everyone and left the table." A brief pause. "He has been many complicated things over the years, but that specific thing was never one of them." Imani stood in the hospital corridor and held this. "Victor was in that group," she said. "Victor was the one who started it," Diane said flatly. "He was always the kind of person who needed to turn other people's lives into games. He hasn't changed." She looked at Imani with her brother's directness. "He sent you that message because he knew exactly which button to push. He's known Malcolm for 15 years, and he spent some of those years watching Malcolm carefully, the way certain kinds of people watch people they intend to use eventually." She straightened. "Malcolm didn't tell you this himself because he didn't want you to take his word for it. That's also his exact character. He doesn't ask for belief without evidence." Imani thought about the security report Malcolm had filed before he left the mountain, about the refund he'd arranged for her lodge accommodations, about a man who documented everything before he drove down a mountain in the dark, making sure the record was complete and her position was protected, not knowing if he'd see her again. "He gets it from you," Imani said quietly. Diane looked at her. For the first time, something that was not the compressed operational affect of a vigil broke through. Something briefly, genuinely warm. "Probably," she said. "We had the same upbringing. Proved things with actions. Didn't ask for credit." She paused. "Terrible combination for emotional communication. We've been working on it." He woke on Thursday. Diane called her at 11:17 in the morning while Imani was in a strategy meeting on the 32nd floor. She had been running the company's editorial operations for 6 days and doing it well, which she noted as data. She excused herself and took the call in the corridor. "He's asking for you," Diane said. Not as a question, not as an update, as an instruction. She was at the hospital by 12:30. He was sitting up. That was the first thing that... He was sitting up. The bed adjusted so he was at a 45-degree angle and his eyes were open, and they were the same eyes, The dark and focused ones she'd known from Table 17 and an elevator and a farmer's market and a 14th floor window and a mountain lodge doorway. He was pale, and he was slower than himself, and there was still the bruising along his jaw, but he was awake. He looked at her when she came in. Something in his face arranged itself. "You came before," he said. His voice was hoarser than usual, the edges roughed up. "Diane told me." "I did," she said. She sat in the chair, the same chair. "I talked to you." "What did you say?" She looked at him. She thought about the corridor version of herself, the careful, managed, archived version. And then she thought about 4 pages of documentation and a dinner mint and a house with a hole in it and a man who filed a security report on a mountain before he drove into the dark. "I said I trust you," she said, "and I said I left because I didn't know how to hold that safely, and I said I was sorry." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with the expression she knew best, the one that wasn't the executive composure, but the one underneath it, the tired and genuine and carefully glad one. "The bet," he said. "Diane told me," she said. "You didn't participate. Victor started it." She paused. "I should have asked you before I left. I had the right to ask, and I left instead." "You had every reason to be uncertain," he said. "The message was designed for you specifically. It was designed to reach exactly the fear that exists specifically in your history." His voice was rough, but his precision was intact. He was still, even here, someone who said things with care. "I don't blame you for the leaving." "I blame me for the leaving," she said. "That's the important part." He looked at her. "I want to say something to you," she said, "and I need you to just let me say it without managing it." He held her gaze. "Okay. I have spent 4 years being very good at protecting myself," she said, "at not letting things land too close, at deciding in advance what was worth risking and building my life inside those parameters. And I'm good at it. It has kept Nia safe, and it has kept my career intact even when people were actively working against it, and it has—" She stopped, assembled the next part. "It has also meant that I have been alone in a very specific way for a very long time. Not lonely, exactly. Just alone. And I had decided that was an acceptable condition, that I could sustain it indefinitely." She held his gaze. His monitors were steady. The city was outside his window. "And then you sat at Table 17, she said, "and I have spent 4 months building reasons why that should be contained and professional and managed. And then a man in a hospital bed asked for me when he woke up, and I—" She stopped. "I'm done managing it." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "Imani," he said. "Yeah." "My daughter comes first," he said. Not his daughter, her daughter, quoting her back to herself from the beginning. Always. She felt the recognition of it hit her somewhere central. "Yes," she said. "Then that's where we start," he said. "Nia first, always. No exceptions, no negotiations." He paused, and the corner of his mouth moved slightly in the way she'd learned to read as the space where a smile would be. "Eli second, then everything else." She felt something loosen all the way through her. Not the brief, defended loosening she'd been allowing herself in controlled increments for 4 months, but something structural, something that had been holding a significant weight for a long time and had just been told it was allowed to set it down. "There are things we need to talk about," she said. "Victor, the board, what the next several months look like at Meridian." "I know," he said, "and there are things I need to understand about you, about how you work, what you need, where you've been. Not because I'm doing due diligence, but because I'm actually asking." "I know that too," he said. "I'll tell you. And you need to understand the same things about me," she said. "The same way, actually." "Yes," he said simply. No performance of it, no management, just the word, carrying its full weight. She sat back in the chair and looked at him, and he looked at her. And the monitors kept their steady record of a body healing, and outside the window the city moved through its ordinary Thursday afternoon, completely unaware that 2 people were, in a hospital room with bad lighting and a view of an unremarkable street, deciding something. "Victor's finished," she said after a while. Patricia Gaines presented the board with the full documentation Thursday morning. The keycard evidence, the reservation deletion, the photographs, all of it. He resigned before they could formally remove him. "I know," Malcolm said. "Patricia called this morning." He paused. "How was the board meeting Monday?" "I told you before," she said. He looked at her. "Tell me again." "I was good," she said. And then because she was done managing it, because she had decided, "You made me senior director of editorial strategy, because you'd read the internal documentation and you knew what I was worth. That was right. I am worth it. And I've spent 6 days proving it to a boardroom that wasn't sure, and I am still worth it." Something in his eyes, a clarity, a specific recognition, the quality of a man who has known something for a while and is glad to hear it confirmed. "Yes," he said, "you are." They stayed another hour. She told him about the 6 days of operational continuity, about the 2 authors who had requested her specifically, about Patricia Gaines' single nod. He told her about the 40 minutes of consciousness on Wednesday, about asking for Eli first and then her, and about what it had felt like to wake up in a room and not know what condition things were in, professionally or otherwise. "What did it feel like?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Like a house with a hole in it," he said, and not knowing if the person who could help fix it was still there. She held that. She held the image of it, the house he'd described to Eli, the wind getting in, the drawing taped to a door and kept there. She held the specific, accurate weight of someone using a metaphor that had already been used between them, building something continuous between one conversation and another across months. "I'm still here," she said. He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I can see that." And then, because she was done managing it, she reached over and put her hand over his, carefully, because of the IV line, conscious of the bruising, not performing any of it, and left it there. His hand turned beneath hers and held on. Neither of them said anything. The monitors kept their record. Outside, the city was just the city, ordinary and vast, and entirely unaware that 2 people who had been sitting in separate rooms of their own construction for a very long time had finally, simply, decided to be in the same one. Amani sat in the chair beside his bed and held his hand and let herself be where she was, and did not build a single wall around it. He came home on a Sunday. Not to her apartment, to his own, a brownstone in a quieter part of the city that she'd never seen but that Diane had described once as looking exactly like Malcolm. Structured on the outside, warmer than expected on the inside, with better bookshelves than any reasonable person required. He was discharged with instructions, follow-up appointments, and the specific mandate of someone whose medical team had spent 10 days arguing him toward rest and had achieved a partial victory at best. The collarbone would need another 4 weeks in the brace. The ribs would take 6. The head injury, the one that had kept him unconscious, and that had reorganized Amani's entire understanding of what mattered, had resolved without the complications they'd feared, which the neurologist described as fortunate, and which Diane described as his skull being constitutionally unreasonable. Amani did not go to the brownstone that Sunday. She sent a message. "Welcome home. Nia made you something. We'll bring it when you're ready." He replied within the hour. "I'm ready now, if you are." She looked at the message for approximately 4 seconds, which was all the deliberating she allowed herself these days, and typed back, "Give us an hour." Nia spent 45 of those minutes constructing a card. It was an elaborate production involving 3 different colors of marker, a quantity of star stickers that significantly exceeded what the card's surface area could reasonably accommodate, and a written message that took up the entire interior and spilled onto the back. The message, which Nia dictated and Amani helped spell, read, "Dear Malcolm, I heard you had an accident. That is very bad, and I am sorry. I still have the magic mint. Eli says you will be okay because you have a strong brain. I think so too. Also, butterflies are still the moon's messengers, even if Eli disagrees. Love, Nia. P.S. When you are better, can you teach me another trick?" Amani read it twice. She thought about the fact that her 5-year-old had included a philosophical position statement in a get well card as a matter of course. She thought about what it meant that Nia and Eli had been in enough contact for Eli to have communicated his prognosis assessment to Nia directly. She thought about how the shape of things had changed over 4 months so gradually that she hadn't noticed the accumulation of it until moments like this, when she held a Get Well card covered in star stickers and felt the specific weight of something that had been quietly, persistently building itself into a life. The brownstone was on a tree-lined block that still had some of its October leaves, dry gold, holding on past their season with the particular stubbornness of things that aren't ready to let go. She stood on the front steps with Nia beside her, both of them holding the card, and rang the bell. Diane opened the door. "He's in the front room," she said. "Don't let him pretend he's fine. He's been up since 6, and he's been fine at me all morning, and I am tired of his version of fine." "I know his version of fine," Amani said. "Good," Diane said. "Use it." He was on the couch with a book he was not reading, and the controlled stillness of a man who has been told to rest and finds rest approximately as natural as a held breath. He was in a gray sweater and the collarbone brace, and he was the most ordinary version of himself she'd seen. Not the executive, not the managed composure, just a person on a couch on a Sunday morning. He looked up when she came in. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. Nia went directly to him and held out the card with both hands, which was how she presented things of significant importance. He took it with his good arm and read it in full, with genuine attention, which Nia monitored from approximately 6 inches away with the intensity of someone awaiting a verdict. "The butterflies are the moon's messengers," he said when he'd finished. "Yes," Nia said firmly. "Eli is going to want to discuss the orbital mechanics of that." "Oh, he can discuss them," Nia said with great generosity. "I'm not changing my mind." Something moved across Malcolm's face. The real smile. The one that arrived slowly and stayed. The one she'd been cataloging since table 17. "Fair enough," he said. He looked at Amani over Nia's head. "Thank you for coming." "Nia made you a card," Amani said. "There was no scenario where we didn't come." "I know," he said. And the way he said it, like knowing she would come, was something he had filed under things that were simply true about the world. Solid as furniture, not requiring astonishment, did the same thing it always did. It landed in the place past her defenses. She sat in the chair across from him. Nia, having completed her primary mission, drifted toward the bookshelves with the focused interest of someone who has spotted a shelf section that appears to contain illustrated science books, which it did, because this was Eli's territory, and Eli organized his interests the way Malcolm organized everything, thoroughly. They talked for 2 hours. Not about Victor, not about the board, not about the operational details she'd been managing for 10 days. About smaller things. Eli's Saturn model, which had achieved a diameter of 14 inches and now lived on his desk as a permanent fixture. The manuscript Amani had been tracking that had come in with a revised second act that she thought was now genuinely exceptional. The follow-up medical appointments and the specific argument Malcolm was preparing to make to his physical therapist about the timeline for returning to the office, which Diane had described as optimistic, and which the physical therapist had described as a negotiating position she intended to reject. "You're going back too fast," Amani said. "I've been gone 10 days. You were unconscious for 3 of them. The other 7 were productive." She looked at him. "Malcolm, the company needs—" "I've been running the company," she said. "The company is fine. The company will continue to be fine for however many weeks your medical team says you need." She held his gaze. "This is not negotiable." He looked at her. The expression on his face was one she hadn't seen before, or hadn't seen clearly before. Something that was in the neighborhood of gratitude, but deeper, more specific. The expression of someone who has been managing alone for long enough that being told, firmly and without drama, that someone else has it handled, registers somewhere that doesn't usually receive information. "Okay," he said. 3 weeks minimum," she said. 2.5. 3. A pause. 2 weeks, 4 days. "That's 3 weeks minus 3 days, and I'm not accepting the framing," she said. And he smiled, really, fully, the smile that took its time, and said, 3 weeks. And she thought about all the times that word had moved between them and what it had meant each time, opening and closing and opening again, and thought, this is what it looks like when it stays open. Nia looked up from the illustrated astronomy book she'd claimed from the shelf. Are you arguing? She asked. Negotiating, Imani said. Same thing, Naya said with authority, and went back to her book. Victor Hale's formal resignation was accepted by the board on the following Tuesday. Patricia Gaines sent Imani a single line by email. The matter has been concluded. The documentation you provided was essential. Imani read it, forwarded it to her personal archive, and went back to the editorial strategy session she'd been running, which was going well, which most things she ran were going. The full scope of what Victor had done accumulated in the weeks following his departure. The way these things do. In pieces, each one clarifying the picture, the whole becoming visible only when enough of the parts were in place. The 11 blocked advancement opportunities, the redirected commendations, the emails retrieved from archived servers by the IT security team, in which he had quietly managed the narrative around her work for 4 years, inserting himself into attribution chains, flagging her for review during cycles when she was most vulnerable to it, cultivating the impression in the executive floor's peripheral awareness that Imani Brooks was good but not quite ready, capable but not yet proven, a resource to be used rather than a leader to be developed. She read the summary report once, alone in her office with the door closed, and sat with it for 15 minutes. She felt anger, clean and factual and appropriate, the kind that doesn't require an audience. She felt the specific retroactive grief of someone understanding what they lost while it was being taken from them. She felt beneath both of those the quieter and more durable thing, the knowledge that the work had still been hers. The Hartwell campaign, the 2 authors who'd requested her at the retreat, the 6 days of operational continuity she'd maintained while Malcolm was in the hospital, and the board's formal acknowledgement of her leadership capacity, which had been entered into the record at Patricia Gaines's recommendation and which could not be unwritten. Victor had managed the narrative for 4 years. He had not managed the work. The work was still there, documented and verifiable and entirely hers. And in the end, that was the thing that had mattered. She closed the report and went back to her afternoon. She told Malcolm about it that evening, on the phone, the way she'd gotten into the habit of calling in the evening when Nia was in bed, which had started as updates about the company and had become something less easily categorized, the kind of conversation that doesn't have a clear agenda because its purpose is simply the conversation itself. "How do you feel?" he asked when she'd finished. "Honestly?" She thought about it. "Like I want the 4 years back. And like I know I can't have them, so I'm going to do something useful with the anger instead." "What's useful?" "I've been looking at the junior editorial pipeline," she said. "There are 4 people on the 4th floor who are in exactly the position I was in, doing work above their title, producing results that get absorbed into someone else's output. I want to restructure the attribution and advancement process so that what happened to me has a harder time happening to them." A silence on his end, not the silence of someone not listening, the silence of someone receiving something carefully. "That's what you want to do with the anger," he said. "That's what I want to do with the next several years," she said. "Not just the anger." "Send me the proposal when you have it," he said. "I'll clear the path." "I don't need you to clear the path," she said. "I need you to not block it." "I know the difference," he said. "I won't block it." She believed him. That was the thing she kept coming back to. The thing that was different about this particular version of trust from the careful, provisional, heavily managed version she'd been offering the world for 5 years. She simply believed him. Not because she had suspended her judgment, but because she had applied it, fully, with everything she had. And the conclusion was consistent. He was who he was in every room. He didn't scale his version of himself to the audience. He filed security reports before he drove into the dark. He arranged refunds from hospital beds. He sat at table 17 because he wanted to be there, and he had not required anything of her except the chance to be in the same room, honestly. She believed him, and the believing was not a risk she was managing. It was just a fact. Malcolm came back to the office on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks and 1 day after the accident. He had not made an event of the return. No announcement, no assembled staff, no performative resumption of authority. He simply walked in at 8:50, nodded to the people he passed in the corridor, and went to his office. Imani saw him from across the executive floor at 9:15 through the glass wall of the conference room where she was in a session with 2 authors and a contracts attorney. He was at his desk with coffee and a document, and he looked from the distance of the glass wall exactly like himself, the contained, directed energy present again, the stillness that had something moving in it. He looked up once, across the distance, and found her through the glass. She gave him one small nod. He gave it back. She went back to her session. The months that followed were the kind of months that don't announce themselves as significant while they're happening. They are the months of the actual work, the daily accumulation of what you build after the crisis has resolved, and the architecture of something new is still in progress. Amani ran her department. She produced. She developed the attribution restructuring proposal and presented it to the executive team in November and had it approved with one modification, which she accepted because the modification was reasonable, and began implementing it in December. The 4 junior editors she'd identified were formally recognized in the annual review cycle, their titles and compensation adjusted to reflect what they'd already been doing, and she watched each of them receive the news with the specific, complicated expression of someone who has been waiting for a room to confirm what they already knew about themselves. She understood that expression from the inside. Her work was undeniable now, which it had always been, but the record finally reflected it. The authors who requested her sent manuscripts to her directly. The board referenced her operational leadership from October in the annual report. Derek Paulson, who had been gently relocated to a lateral position in a restructuring that Malcolm executed with the quiet precision of someone who had been waiting for the right organizational moment, sent her a congratulatory email that she read once and archived without responding, because she had reached the stage of the story where she no longer needed anything from him. Malcolm healed. He came back to full capacity by December, which his physical therapist described as consistent with the timeline, and which Diane described as the universe-rewarding stubbornness, which was not a scientific theory, but which Amani found persuasive. He ran the company with the same contained, exacting focus he'd always had, and he ran it differently now. With Amani in the room, in the structural position that had been designed for her, in the executive conversations she'd been shaped for 4 years to handle. They were good together professionally in the way that 2 people are good together when they've stopped performing their roles for each other and are simply doing the work. Outside of work, things moved the way they moved, with the particular pace of 2 people who have both learned the cost of moving without thinking and have decided that steadiness is more valuable than speed. They had dinner, the 4 of them, on a Sunday in November, Amani and Naya and Malcolm and Eli, at a restaurant that had been selected by committee, which meant Eli had named 3 criteria and Naya had selected based on which one had the most interesting-looking dessert menu in the window. Eli sat across from Nia and discussed, with careful formality, the letter he had written her about butterfly mechanics. He had brought it. He presented it across the table with the gravity of a diplomatic document. Nia received it with matching gravity, read it, and said, "You make good points, but I'm keeping the moon's messengers." "I expected that," Eli said. "I included a counter-argument on the 3rd page." "I'll read it," Nia said, with great diplomatic generosity, "when I'm ready." Malcolm, beside Amani, said nothing. She looked at him and found the real smile already there, the slow one, and she thought, this exact thing, this is what it looks like. She reached under the table and found his hand. He held it without looking, the way you hold things that have become natural. They walked home through November air that had gotten serious about being cold, the 4 of them on a city sidewalk, Nia and Eli ahead, with the specific purposeful energy of children who have designated themselves the navigators and are taking it seriously. Malcolm walked beside her, close enough that their arms touched at the shoulder periodically, in the easy, unperformed way of people who have stopped calculating the distance between them. "Eli told Nia about his mother," Malcolm said quietly, after a while. "Last week. He asked if he could, and I said yes, and he—" A brief pause. "He said he wanted her to know, because they were friends and he didn't want there to be things she didn't know." Amani looked at him. "What did Nia say?" "She said she understood because she had a dad who left and didn't come back, and that was also a kind of losing." Malcolm was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if he wanted to see the magic mint. Amani felt the back of her throat tighten, with something she recognized as the specific emotion of a parent whose child has done something that exceeds their expectations in a way that is also somehow entirely characteristic. "She still has it," she said. She keeps it in a small box on her nightstand now, he said. She told Eli it was the first piece of magic she'd ever kept. They walked another half block in the cold air while Imani held this. The mint on the nightstand. The box. The conversation between two children who were figuring out the shape of a world that had changed in ways neither of them had chosen. And who were doing it, it turned out, with more grace than the adults around them had managed. He drew her a picture, Malcolm said, of a house with a hole in it. He said he wanted her to have one too, so she knew she wasn't the only one. Imani stopped walking. He stopped beside her. She looked at him on the November sidewalk while their children continued ahead, their voices carrying back in the cold air, arguing about which street to turn on, and she felt the full weight of everything that had moved between them in the months since a wedding and a table in the back, and a word she'd said without her usual scaffolding of caution. "Malcolm," she said. He turned to face her. His expression was the real one, the one underneath the composure, the tired and genuine and carefully glad one, the one that had always been there if you were paying the right kind of attention. She didn't say anything else for a moment. She just looked at him and let herself be looked at and held the full, unmanaged weight of it. "Thank you," she said, "for table 17. "You've thanked me for that before," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll probably keep doing it." He looked at her. "Why that specifically?" "Because you didn't have to be there," she said. "You made a choice, in a room that was telling both of us where we were supposed to be, and you made a different choice. You chose the wrong table, on purpose." She paused. "That's where everything started. That choice." He was quiet for a moment. The children had discovered they disagreed about which block the restaurant had been on and were relitigating the route with significant investment. The city moved around them, indifferent and continuous, the way it always did. "I've been thinking about something," Malcolm said. "Okay," she said. "Not a work thing," he said. The other thing." She waited. He reached into his coat pocket. She watched his face, which was doing something she hadn't seen before, not the controlled executive composure, not the tired and careful real version. Something that was those things, but also exposed, in the way of someone who has decided to be visible without the protection of managing the outcome. He held a small box, not a dramatic box, not jewelry store velvet and presentation, a simple box, dark blue, the kind you didn't need to announce. "I've thought about how to do this," he said. "I considered something orchestrated, something with the right kind of setting and the right kind of moment." He looked at her directly. "And then I thought about what we actually are, and I thought the setting should be honest." He opened the box. The ring inside was simple and precise and exactly right in the way of things chosen by someone who pays attention. "Nia first," he said. "Always. Eli second. Then everything else. Those are the terms I accepted at a hospital in October, and they're the terms I'm bringing here." His voice was steady and quiet, and stripped of everything except what it was. "I'm not asking because you're exceptional at your job, or because I sat at your table and it changed things, or because Nia keeps a magic mint in a box, or because the last 6 months have been the first 6 months in 5 years where I have not felt like I'm living in a house with a permanent hole in it." He paused. "I'm asking because you are who you are. And I have been paying attention to who you are for long enough to know that I want to keep paying attention for a very long time." He held the box. He held her gaze. "Imani Brooks," he said, "will you marry me?" He said it without the rising inflection of a question, not because he was presuming, but because he was someone who said things as statements of what he meant, and let the other person decide. Around them, the city did what it always did. Cars moved. Somewhere down the block, a door opened and closed. The cold air carried the smell of fallen leaves and coffee from a shop they were standing near, and the ordinary, irreplaceable scent of a city in November going about its business. Ahead of them on the sidewalk, Nia and Eli had resolved their navigational disagreement and were now looking back at their parents with the specific, alert attention of children who have detected that something is happening. "Mommy," Nia called. "What is that box?" Imani looked at her daughter, the round face and the braids and the 5-year-old authority and the magic mint keeper and the moon's messenger believer. And she looked at Malcolm, who was holding the ring with the patient steadiness of someone who understood that the answer would come when it came and would not perform waiting. She thought about a wedding and a table and the word okay, said without the usual scaffolding. She thought about cold tea and a city through a 14th floor window. She thought about a farmer's market phone call and a science museum, and two children who had drawn each other pictures of houses with holes in them so neither of them would feel alone in the specific shape of their loss. She thought about a security report filed before a mountain road in the dark. She thought about a hospital room and a hand held carefully around an IV line. She thought about 4 pages of documentation and 4 years of doing the work, and a boardroom where she had been excellent on her own terms and known it. She thought about what she'd said in that hospital room when she'd thought he couldn't hear her. "I trust you." She thought about how it had felt to say it out loud, not as a risk calculation, not as a provisional offering, but as a simple fact that had been true for longer than she'd acknowledged and had been waiting for her to stop managing it. She thought about all the walls she'd built, and what they'd cost, and what they'd protected, and the difference, which she had finally learned to tell. She looked at Malcolm Reed on a November sidewalk in the city where they both lived and worked and were building something, and she felt the full weight of it. Not the fear, not the caution, not the architecture of protection. Just the weight of something real and earned and chosen by two people who had both learned that some things cannot be managed into existence and cannot be protected into existence, and can only be built slowly and honestly by showing up. "Yes," she said. Not because a CEO had chosen her, not because the board had validated her, not because the record had been corrected or the promotion had been deserved or the story had finally resolved in her favor after 4 years of moving sideways. Because a man, a black single father who had lost things and kept going and sat at the wrong table on purpose and called on Tuesday nights to tell the truth before anything else happened, had shown up consistently and specifically and without requiring her to perform gratitude for it, and had become, over the course of ordinary evenings and museum visits and phone calls and shared silences in a hospital room and 6 months of actual living, the person she trusted most. Because Nia kept a magic mint in a box and believed in things, and that belief deserved a world that lived up to it. Because she had been alone in a specific way for a very long time, and she was done. "Yes," she said again, because it felt like something worth saying twice. He took the ring out of the box and put it on her hand with a steadiness that did not waver, and then he looked at her and the real smile was there, slow and full and unhurried, and she thought, there it is, that's the one. Nia arrived at a run, covering the distance from the point of her navigational victory in approximately 4 seconds, and inserted herself between them with the absolute authority of someone who is the rightful center of events. "Is that a ring?" she demanded. "Yes," Amani said. "Are you getting married?" "We're going to talk about it," Amani said. "All of us. Together." Nia looked at the ring. She looked at Malcolm. She looked at her mother with the expression she used when she was making a final determination. "Is there going to be a wedding?" she asked. "Probably," Malcolm said. "Can I be in the procession?" Nia asked. "Officially, not practically. Officially." "Officially," Malcolm said. "First in line." Nia considered this. She looked at Eli, who had arrived at a more measured pace and was standing at the edge of the group with the expression of someone who is processing new information and will have analysis available shortly. "Eli," Nia said, "we're going to be family." Eli looked at her. He looked at his father. He looked at Amani. He did the thing he did, the brief, focused, internal assessment that took its time and meant something when it landed. "Okay," he said. One word. The door opening. Imani looked at Malcolm and found him looking at her, and the smile was still there, and the November air was cold, and the city was the city, ordinary and vast and entirely unaware, and the 4 of them stood on a sidewalk in it and were, in the specific and irreducible way of people who have found each other in the middle of lives that had already happened to them, a family. Not the family either of the adults had imagined when they were younger, and the world had seemed like it would cooperate with imagination. Not the family that had been taken from them by departure and death, and the ordinary, devastating contingency of things. The family that had been built, out of a wrong table, and a magic trick, and 4 pages of documentation and 2 children who drew pictures of houses with holes in them, and a ring on a November sidewalk in a city that didn't care either way. The family they had both, in the private and unannounced way of people who have learned not to want things too loudly, spent longer than they admitted dreaming about. Nia took Malcolm's hand on one side and her mother's on the other, and began walking again because she was 5 and she had places to be. Eli fell into step beside his father. Imani walked, and the ring was on her hand, and the cold air was in her lungs, and the city was ahead of them, and she did not look back. She was done looking back. The only direction that mattered now was forward, on an ordinary street, in an ordinary city, with the people she had chosen and who had chosen her, not because they had to, not because they had run out of options, not because the story had required it, because they had sat at the wrong table on purpose, and everything true had started there.